Welcome to Equipped to Stand. I'm your host, Sheri, and today it's just me. No guest, no fancy agenda. I just want to share a story I stumbled into this past week along with some of my thoughts and feelings. So grab a coffee or whatever you're sipping and let's get started. The past month has been a lot. I've been going to all these classes, partly because I'm searching for a way to help with my husband's medical bills. I don't want it all to fall on my normal income or constantly depend on friends and donors, So here I am in these packed rooms with salespeople pitching products that are way too expensive. I'm listening, learning, scribbling notes, and sometimes wondering if there's a sign on my forehead that says, "I'm only here for the free stuff, LOL." But as I looked around, I started wondering who else in this room has a story. With half the population dealing with chronic illness, there's a whole sea of unseen pain and resilience sitting right there beside me. At my table was a young man. I didn't get to speak to him much the first day, but on day 2, it was just the two of us in the room. His name tag read YAKUBU, and I had no idea how to say it. He told me it's Yakubu, which means Jacob, and that he's from Nigeria. The moment he said Nigeria, I asked, "Tell me about your faith in God." We were in a faith-based class, so I felt like I could ask that bluntly. We talked about pastors I admire from Nigeria, fiery preachers who pray like no one I've ever heard in the U.S., and he knew who they were. He told me he's getting his PhD at OU, so I asked him if he believes in miracles, and he looked at me and said, "What God cannot do does not exist." At that moment, I knew he was my brother in Christ. I wrote my husband's information in his notebook and asked him, "Would you be willing to go by, lay hands on my husband, and pray for him to get up?" To my surprise, he said yes, and wouldn't you know it, the very next morning at Life Church, Craig Groeschel preached, "Your maturity is the distance between what God asks you to do and your obedience." Yakubu's yes was his obedience to God, using my little voice to step out in faith. Later during class, I asked if he knew Reinhard Bonnke. He lit up immediately. Of course, everyone in Nigeria knows Reinhard. He told me Bonnke's crusades were legendary, oceans of people as far as you could see. Bonnke saw millions of documented salvations, and even after his passing, that number continues to climb. And then Yakubu casually mentioned, "I was at one of his crusades in 2014. I walked over 4 hours to get there." Friends, I could hardly breathe. Reinhard Bonnke is one of my faith heroes, someone I've admired from afar. And here I was, sitting next to a man who had actually stood in that sea of people. He described it: endless crowds, miracles breaking out everywhere, wheelchairs lifted above heads as people were healed. He said you couldn't look anywhere without seeing the power of God moving. I sat there crying because I had only dreamed of witnessing that, and God brought someone who lived it right to my table. And then Yakubu shared something even more sobering. Years ago, he survived a suicide bombing in Nigeria. He had been riding in a tricycle taxi when just before the explosion, 2 extra passengers jumped in. When the bomb went off, their bodies shielded him from the worst of it. He said he couldn't hear, couldn't speak, his body burned. In his mind, all he could do was whisper, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." And then he woke up in a hospital, one of the very first survivors to arrive. He believes with all his heart that God spared him for a purpose. Friends, I almost missed this story. In a crowded room, I could have kept to myself. But God had something waiting for me and for Yakubu in that moment. Another woman at our table shared that she'd suffered a stroke and was living with facial paralysis. Right there in that classroom, Yakubu and I laid hands on her and prayed for healing. That moment reminded me, the Spirit of God doesn't wait for Sunday services. He moves wherever his people are willing. Across the room, I recognized a couple from my homeschooling circle years ago. They had lost their daughter to cancer more than a decade ago, a beautiful, vibrant girl. I remember how deeply they loved her and how devastating that season was. Seeing them reminded me that some pains never fully leave, but God still carries us through. Then there was a man I had crossed paths with in the past when I was moving in November 2023. My finances were tight, and he did some work for me. I didn't want to pay at the time because things were so rough, but I knew it wouldn't be right not to. So I paid him. Yesterday in that class, he told someone sitting next to me that the money I gave him back then was literally what kept him afloat. He only had a few dollars left to his name, and that job was God's provision. And I had no idea. I thought I was just doing the right thing. But he marks it as answered prayer. Today, he owns his own business. And then, the cherry on top, the young woman sitting next to us piped up and said, "You know, my mentor always told me," and started quoting things I had told her years ago. I didn't even realize she thought of me as her mentor, and yet here she was, years later, still carrying those words with her. Friends, the littlest things matter. A payment, a prayer, a kind word, a yes. God uses them in ways we may never see in the moment. Look at God. Just look at Him, blessing me, encouraging me, letting me meet people who remind me of His goodness. So I want to ask you, what stories are in the room with you right now? What are you missing because you're distracted or self-conscious or just tired? How often do we sit in a room full of people and miss the very thing God wanted to show us? These days, I walk alone a lot. And because I know how heavy loneliness feels, I'm always looking for others walking alone too. I don't want anyone to feel the way I have. So if you're listening and you feel that ache of loneliness, reach out. Let's connect. And fair warning, if you do, I'll probably invite you to visit Trace with me. Before I wrap up, let me leave you with this. Who do you need to reach out to? Whose story do you need to hear? And how might your life, your obedience, your yes, no matter how small, make a difference? Thank you for joining me today on Equipped to Stand. We really are equipped to stand, even when it's hard, standing, rejoicing, even grounding our feet and soaking in God's presence. It strengthens us in ways we don't even realize. So, if you feel weak today, in your knees, your arms, your spirit, strengthen those weak knees, my friend. God is able. I love you guys. Have a great week.